Welcome back to Posting Through It. I'm Jared.
And I'm Mike.
This week's listener music comes to us from Crystal Joy. She said she's been listening to the show religiously since it launched and shared some links to the tunes she's put out. A lot of her more recent releases are albums, these lovely piano arrangements, but the track I picked of hers today is an older one called Prelude. You'll hear bits and pieces of it throughout the episode, and I'll throw a link to it down in the description of this episode. And if you make music, be sure to send it our way. We might feature it on the show.
Or John Peel part of the show. The subscribers to our premium feed, which I recommend everyone signs up if you haven't already. If you're thinking about it, this is a good time to do it. We covered something that we're going to cover in a little bit more detail today, which is some of the grifting done by Polymarket in paying social media influencers to produce content. And if you go back, you can hear that. That was Thursday's episode. But some of the stuff you're going to hear this week is probably a lot worse, right, Jared?
Yeah. Folks also heard us. We became the first podcast brave enough to discuss the state of New York City basketball.
No one has ever done a bad basketball podcast before this.
Yeah, we might get canceled for it, but, I don't know. Look at Joe Rogan. That worked out pretty well for him.
The weight of you is very hard to carry. The lightning flashes over.
Following up on the episode we did last week, some of the stuff we've been talking about on the premium, this week we're going to talk about how the tech industry, specifically the areas related to cryptocurrency and now AI, are working to influence the U.S. government, and why that should concern anyone who cares about the U.S. having a free and fair democracy. Our guest today is Molly White, a longtime researcher who's been looking at the growing influence of so-called Web 3.0, and more recently, the AI industry. Molly, what's up? Welcome back to Posting Through It. I thought for sure I'd had you on when I was doing the show as Shitpost, and I looked in the archives, and sure enough, 4 years ago, you were on, and we were talking about, NFTs, Bored Apes, and all of that. Tell me what you've been up to since then.
Well, less NFTs these days, but I still follow the cryptocurrency industry very closely. Now I do a lot of work following the industry's influence on politics, which I don't think I was doing about 4 years ago because it was not nearly what it is today. And I've started to also follow the way that the artificial intelligence industry is essentially adopting the playbook that the crypto industry put in motion in 2024 to influence politics and really buy legislation and regulation, or lack thereof, that's favorable to their industries.
Yeah, they call that stuff Web3, right? That's the term. But for me, it just represents something that is a lot, whatever it is a lot sketchier seeming than Web 2 or previous iterations of whatever we called the web.
Yeah, I think crypto has to rebrand itself pretty often when people get sick of it, or they sort of discover what's actually going on, or they become very skeptical of it. And so there's been this repeated cycle of crypto adopting new names, and Web3 was one of them. I feel like they've already dropped that one. You don't even hear it that much anymore. And, people talk about blockchain or digital assets or something like that instead, because it sounds more legitimate and doesn't bring up nightmares about Bored Apes, pretty much.
The other thing I wanted to ask you before we go, because we're just meeting for the first time, is what happened to the Bored Apes? Because every once in a while I will see, for people who don't know what that is, actually, we should probably explain. There was a series of cartoon apes in different outfits. Like, this is my little sailor ape. This is my little baseball player ape, right? It's almost like Cabbage Patch dolls or He-Man figures or something. They're just each one in a different costume. And that they were supposed to accumulate in value, right? They're supposed to go up and up and up. And I've seen these things. It's these stories where it's $3 million sold, now worth $9. Is that true? Has it all disappeared? What's going on with those those
Yeah.
images that people were selling online.
Yeah, I mean, it's not gone well. A lot of the NFT collections have really tanked in value. Many of them have been more or less abandoned by their creators who promised that there would be these ongoing communities and events and, your ape would get you access to some, party or whatever, and you don't see very much of that anymore. And yeah, a lot of people who spent, millions of dollars on NFTs are now holding these digital collectibles that are worth very little compared to what they once were.
Yeah, it's so like the whiplash is crazy because you had like Jimmy Kimmel and
Yeah.
Justin Bieber and
Paris
Paris
Hilton,
Hilton
yeah.
getting on there and just being like, I love these little apes. They're
Yep.
so great.
Yes.
And
Yeah, there's this really uncanny valley sort of celebrity adoption of NFTs that was like, what are we doing here? What is happening?
yeah, and I feel like we're seeing that now with like online gambling and
Yeah.
AI, but I'm sure we'll get to that in a minute. You mentioned that the crypto industry really sank its teeth into trying to influence politics in 2024. And I feel like the clearest exhibit of that I think most people are familiar with is the fact that, according to some estimates, like by Forbes, Trump has managed to use cryptocurrency to increase his net worth by billions of dollars since taking the seat in his second term last year. And that's been raising an alarm on Capitol Hill for obvious reasons about insider dealing, the fact that, this stuff is hard to track. But it's worth noting that Trump wasn't always so keen on cryptocurrency. Take this 2019 tweet from him. Mike, do you want to read this?
I'm not a fan of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, which are not money and whose value is highly volatile and based on thin air. Unregulated assets can facilitate unlawful behavior, including drug trade and other illegal activity. We have only one real cryptocurrency in the US, or one real currency in the US, and it is stronger than ever, both dependable and reliable. It is by far the most dominant currency anywhere in the world, and it will always stay that way. It's called the United States dollar.
Even in 2021, this was kind of his message, his position on cryptocurrency for the longest time. Here's a clip of an interview he did with Fox Business where he said that he thought crypto was dangerous, even.
Crypto, because New York and Miami is really getting cryptocurrency into their financial system.
Well, I never loved it because I like to have the dollar. I think the currency should be the dollar, so I was never a big fan, but it's building up bigger and bigger and nobody's doing anything about it, and I know it so well. Look, I want a currency called the dollar. I don't want to have all these others, and that could be an explosion someday, like the likes of which we've never seen. It'll make the big tech explosion look like baby stuff. I think it's a very dangerous thing.
Let me ask you about Truth Social.
Molly, what are your thoughts hearing those clips from the archive and thinking about today?
Well, it's a far cry from what he's been saying more recently. He did quite the 180 on his previous stance on crypto in 2024 or thereabouts, although he'd been dabbling with NFTs and things like that previously. But yeah, I mean, I think he has very much changed his tune after the cryptocurrency industry began to flex its wealth and really present themselves as a way for politicians to bolster their voting base, including Donald Trump.
Yeah, you mentioned he was dabbling in it. In late 2021, his wife, Melania Trump, partnered to sell NFTs on the Solana blockchain. The first one, I just get a huge kick out of this, was called Melania's Vision. Have you seen this one, Molly?
I have.
It is a watercolor of Melania's eyes, and it came with a recording of her voice. The next year, Trump licensed his name and image to his own set of NFTs, sold his digital trading cards for $99 each. And by the time he hit the campaign trail, he was explicitly appealing to investors. He was taking campaign donations in crypto, promising to rescue the industry from regulatory scrutiny it was facing from the Biden administration, and made a promise that he would establish a national Bitcoin reserve for for the United States and that the US would be the crypto capital of the world.
If I
Can you
may
touch it?
interject something there, Jared, before you ask, this kind of reversal would have only worked with Trump, in my opinion, because everybody's like, oh, he's so inherently grifty, right? Anyone who said this previously, they'd be like, don't vote for him. He said this, doesn't matter. He's making campaign promises, but they're like, oh, he'll eventually figure out how to scam people. He's going to eventually come to it. This is all this guy does. So therefore, when he reverses, they're like, yes, he's coming to his senses.
I mean, in addition to him dabbling with it and also, seeing sort of the regulation it was facing and lawsuits from the SEC, criminal charges against some people. I mean, Molly, what's your sense of sort of what was going on that may have prompted this reversal?
Well, the cryptocurrency industry made a huge foray into politics in 2024. I mean, this was not the first that they had done it. We had seen spending previously, largely actually from Sam Bankman-Fried, who was one of the biggest, sort of political spenders in the industry until he was sent to prison. And he spent fairly heavily in 2020, but in 2024, it was unlike anything previous, where they were putting over $100 million into congressional elections. And they were trying to convince Congress people that, and, frankly, any candidate for office, that if they got on board with the crypto agenda, this would be a great way to win over huge numbers of voters. And that, the industry could essentially help people win if they were willing to sign on to what the industry was looking for. And I think those types of appeals reached many candidates, including Donald Trump. And I think that Trump not only realized that, hey, this is a way that I can enrich myself, which he had begun to do with the NFTs and would shortly after do with various other crypto projects that he and his family runs personally, but it was also this huge new source of campaign funding that had not previously been available to him. And I think it really went part and parcel with Trump's embrace of broader tech sector figures who are largely funding his campaign. We saw Elon Musk getting heavily involved. Frankly, just about every tech executive was, either on board with his campaign prior to his election or shortly after he was elected, began contributing to his inaugural fund and other sorts of things to try to sort of get favor with Trump. And so I think that crypto was, along for the ride. And most of the crypto industry was heavily behind Trump before the election, feeling that Harris would be an extension of Biden and that the regulatory scrutiny that they had been facing, especially starting in 2022 and onward, would only continue or maybe even worsen under a Harris administration. And so, it was an existential threat, I think, to a lot of players in the crypto industry, and they felt like they needed to do anything they could to install a friendlier administration that would allow them to not only continue to do business, but actually expand their business far beyond what they had been allowed to do prior.
You said an existential threat to their business, right? Do you think that is related to the decision to start spending huge in politics? And what exactly does that mean? What was happening under the Biden administration that got them freaked out enough to start blowing, $100 million on politics?
Well, I think it absolutely was the reason that they became involved. Not only the threat to their business, but I think also the potential for their business was why they started spending like this. Because, $100 million is a huge amount of money, obviously. But if you can buy an administration, legislation, regulation that allows you to expand your business beyond what you had been doing previously and bring in potentially billions of dollars in revenue, then it's just a business decision, right? Like that's an obvious trade-off for somebody who is considering whether or not they should spend this money in politics if they believe that it will have the impact that they want. And I think that's, a huge part of why the industry got into doing this. But yeah, they were facing significant threats to their business model under Biden. And this is largely because the regulators who had the authority and were supposed to be enforcing very standard financial regulations on the cryptocurrency industry started to actually do so. There's this long period of time where the Securities and Exchange Commission and various other financial regulators were sort of just hoping the industry would go away, I think. Like they were not being particularly aware of what was happening in the crypto world. They weren't applying a lot of scrutiny to the crypto industry. And then we saw this huge string of collapses in 2022 when we saw Terra Luna, the stable coin, completely explode. There was a huge hedge fund called Three Arrows Capital that blew up. Then we saw bankruptcies with Voyager, Celsius, a handful of other companies, and then finally culminating with the collapse of FTX in late 2022. And throughout that whole time period, people were asking, where were the regulators? Why was this allowed to happen? These are companies operating in the United States, serving US customers. Why were these obvious frauds continuing to operate? And so we started to see the SEC paying more attention. They brought quite a few enforcement actions against various cryptocurrency companies. The CFTC, which is the commodities regulator, was also bringing enforcement actions. The Department of Justice was bringing criminal cases against Binance, against Sam Bankman-Fried, the CEO of FTX. And so there was this sort of sudden what was perceived as a crackdown by the crypto industry. To me, it was more the regulators actually starting to pay attention and do their jobs a little bit more. But the industry was horrified by this. I mean, they called it a war on crypto. They claimed that they were being persecuted, that they were being, unfairly attacked. They were horrified that the SEC or other regulators would prevent them from offering some of these products that they had been offering that were extremely high risk, like lending, borrowing and lending products and things like that. The SEC started to really pay attention to. And so I think that was where the crypto industry decided they needed to do anything they could to make it stop. And they saw the way to do that would be to install a president who they believed would be in favor of more deregulatory policies, would maybe even buy into this whole story about a war on crypto and all of that. And of course, Congress as well, getting friendly Congress people in place so that they could pass legislation that would allow them to do what it is that they wanted to be doing.
I just wanted to ask one thing that you'd mentioned there, Terra. That was a stable coin. For people who don't know what that means, it's just basically like it serves the function of like a dollar, right? It's like a 1-for-1, or it's supposed to. But it didn't have it didn't have the money to. There weren't the dollars to back it up, right? Like when you have that was basically the thing. It was actually they had like 60 cents actually representing a dollar. It was offline. Do I have that correctly, or?
Sort of. Terra Luna was an unusual stablecoin in that it was something called an algorithmic stablecoin, which is different from what we tend to think of today, which are reserve-backed stablecoins, where you're supposed to have $1 or a treasury or something like that. And so they didn't actually really have reserves so much as they had this weird algorithmic strategy by which the Terra stablecoin was supposed to maintain its peg. And
that's right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
so it's a stable coin like made out of monopoly money, basically.
Yes.
It's a trust me, bro, a token. Basically.
Right. Well, so many of them are.
but that's what I wanted to ask you. I remember reading then that stable coins presented a potential potential cliff to fall off of in terms of the cryptocurrency industry collapsing or something like that. Is there any update on that? Have you seen anything since then? Is there any kind of, because it seems like you cannot actually do business without having this fake dollar as like a middle point when you're doing trading.
Yeah, I mean, you can, and people certainly do, but stablecoins are very useful to the crypto industry in the sense that people want something that is stable. They don't want all of their tokens to be in assets that are highly volatile, and people tend to, especially if you're talking about using crypto as a way to actually buy and sell goods or pay for services, people actually would prefer to use a stable currency to do that. But yeah, I mean, there is this concern when it comes to stablecoins, which is that they are a huge part of the crypto ecosystem. And, if one of the major stablecoins today, like Tether or Circle's USDC or something like that, if they were to depeg, if they were to follow a similar trajectory to Terra and, completely
I believe
lose.
I confused Terra with Tether. Tether is the one that I think was
yes.
facing. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Yeah. So Tether, as of the last time I checked, has not collapsed. But you never know.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, I remember that being like the fear of that happening.
Yeah.
Was pretty high before Trump took power. And I would imagine the way the industry has grown without regulation, these things must be even more scary.
Yeah. And so Tether is definitely a scary piece of the crypto world in that it is this offshore stablecoin. It is supposed to be reserve backed. They claim that they have $1 or $1 equivalent essentially for every Tether that's in circulation. But it has been proven by the New York Attorney General in litigation in 2021, I think, that there are definitely points where Tether was not fully backed as they claimed. And, they've been promising to produce audits for years. They still have not done so. So, I mean, there's huge questions around the stability of something like Tether. And if Tether were to collapse, I mean, it is a foundational part of the cryptocurrency world. That would be a huge catastrophe. And so I think that's something that, a lot of the crypto industry would like to see not happen. And so it's part of, I think, why we're seeing some of the stablecoin regulation that has come out in the past year or two. But definitely a huge risk there for sure.
Yeah, I don't know. Seems like the kind of industry you might want to regulate or investigate on occasion.
Or at least firewall, right? Like if it's going to be so volatile, if it's going to go up in flames every couple of years, as we've seen happen again and again, maybe we should not have this be tightly integrated into the rest of the financial system as the industry and much of the current administration is working to do.
Yeah, so I mean, Trump really jumped feet first into crypto, after being like, this is dangerous, this is bad, what if it explodes, it's a huge scam. It was basically just like, we have to champion it, we have to have a Bitcoin reserve, which in my mind is just like a USB thumb drive locked, like tucked in the back of the break room fridge inside the Treasury.
Yep. As far as I can tell, it's just an Excel spreadsheet. It's really not that much better than what you're describing.
Hell yeah. But the industry was thrilled, right? They threw a big ball on inauguration weekend that had Snoop Dogg, Rick Ross, and Soulja Boy, my personal favorite. The tickets were $2,500 a pop, and for that price, you got to eat McDonald's hamburgers at this event and hang out with David Sachs, who Trump made the White House AI and crypto czar. He did sign an executive order establishing the Bitcoin reserve, appointed regulators they liked, has hosted galas and keynoted events at the White House at Mar-a-Lago, otherwise hyping up its potential. But the honeymoon hasn't lasted. Like, as we're recording this, sort of the idea we have for recording this was just looking at the state of cryptocurrency right now. Bitcoin, the flagship one, like if you've heard of a cryptocurrency, you've probably heard of Bitcoin, was selling at over $100,000 per Bitcoin when Trump took office. Got as high as $122,000 per coin in October last year. And now it's hovering around $60K as of like mid-June when we're recording this. So we're talking from October to June, like a 50% drop. And this is happening to others too. Ether is down 40%, XRP is down 50%, Solana is down about 60% in the same time frame. Giant financial firms have been selling off their stashes of cryptocurrency, kind of looking like they're wanting to get out of this. What's going on? What happened? it was, these guys were riding super high, but now it's like I go in the Bitcoin subreddit and it's so fucking bleak in there.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, the subreddits get really dire.
like these communities, you know, it's like when I was sort of toying around with cryptocurrency around like 2021, it was the pandemic. I was bored. It was new, flashy. I thought, oh, I'll play around with this. You know, you'd always see people, you know, it's like very all this machismo around crypto. Diamond hands, don't hold it. You know, you don't lose money till you sell it, whatever. And now these same communities, at least from what I've seen, are just like, bro, I had to sell my car, man.
Yeah.
Dude,
I couldn't
like
pay my mortgage.
my wife
yeah.
is so pissed.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of my wife didn't know.
We're not gonna
and now
make
she's
it.
going to divorce me type of stuff. Yeah.
What happened? What happened?
Yeah, well, I mean, so there was this sort of what was called the Trump pump when Trump was elected, and then around the time of his inauguration, where crypto was going up, and people were like, we can't possibly, go down from here because we have the president on board and he's selling crypto now too, and, he's not going to let this go down. And sure enough, here we are. And crypto is down considerably, not only from the Trump pump highs, but from when he was elected. And I think, it underscores that even the Trump administration, even having Congress in your pocket, you can't necessarily force prices to stay high, no matter how hard you try. There's always going to be other factors that influence whether or not people are interested in buying crypto. And basic supply and demand is pretty hard to get around. And I think what we've seen is that as there has been economic uncertainty, whether it's to do with tariffs, whether it's to do with employment concerns, and especially with respect to AI, or if it's, to do with wars and ongoing sort of conflicts, broader financial worries, people tend to flee high-risk assets. And crypto is possibly the highest risk asset out there. And so the second things start to get a little bit sketchy, in the economy, crypto tends to sell off. And there has been a lot of those instances of things getting sketchy in the economy since Trump was elected. There's been him threatening tariffs and making people, day to day not have any idea what he's planning to do with the global economy, which makes people very shaky when it comes to their investment strategies. There's the war in Iran. There's, oil prices being high. There's AI. AI stocks are going through it right now. And crypto also these days tends to follow tech stocks fairly closely. And so if tech stocks have a bad time, you tend to see crypto come down. And so it's just been this sort of series of unfortunate events, I guess, for the crypto world. And I think we're also seeing people beginning to question Trump's connection to crypto to some extent, where people feel like maybe the crypto industry went too far in tying themselves to Trump. And if Trump falls out of favor, if he gets out of office, whatever it might be, what's going to happen to crypto? People are really worried about that, I think. And so we're seeing that reflected in crypto prices, which, essentially reflect the overall sentiment.
It seems like also this particular tool is one of the greatest scams in the history of America, cryptocurrency, in many ways. And it's like big fish eating little fish, right? It's like, somebody's always holding the bag and then somebody else is broke. And Trump himself is getting richer and richer and richer, right? We know that even as crypto falls, he's the one, he's holding the bag. He's the one who's able to operate the scam through his celebrity and fame, it seems like.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, did you see that Reuters piece about the people that have lost insane amounts of money buying Trump coin
Right.
and stuff? What did you think of that?
It was an incredible piece. I thought it was very well done.
Because it's like Trump's personal wealth has exploded in large part thanks to cryptocurrency. But reading that piece, it seems like it exploded because he stuck the vacuum nozzle on his supporters and just drained their wallets.
I mean, absolutely. And the striking thing about the piece is the exact same number that he has profited as the amount that his investors have lost. And, I think it's completely accurate, the reflection of how his financial situation has changed with crypto is that he has made huge profits, but not in a way that is actually benefiting other people, because there's not a product here that is actually improving people's lives. There's not a service that people are buying. They're really just buying into the sentiment. They're buying the meme coin, which has no actual business behind it, right? Or they're buying WLFI, which is one of his family's cryptocurrency projects, which doesn't even have a product yet. And so people are just shoveling cash into his pockets, but getting nothing in return. And oftentimes, if they've bought tokens or something like that, those tokens have plummeted in price since then. And so people are just completely out. And I think it, is a broader reflection of what tends to happen in crypto, which is that the wealthy often get extremely wealthy, and everybody else who is buying the things that these wealthy people are selling are hoping that they're in that group. They hope that they're the people who are going to be making billions of dollars off of crypto. And the vast majority of the time, they are not in that group. They are the ones who are buying the Trump tokens and then questioning why they're worth, 80% less than when they purchased them. And I think that some of that fear and that uncertainty is actually being reflected in a much broader sense, which is that there are a lot of big fish that decided to do business with the biggest fish, which is Donald Trump, who are now, I think, questioning whether or not they are, which group they're in, essentially. Are they the ones who are going to make out like bandits, just like Trump, or are they the ones who are going to end up holding the bag when Trump, is decides to take profits off of his companies? And I think that is a pretty serious concern that people should be questioning. If they're deciding to do business with Trump, especially in the crypto sector, are they the guys who are going to be profiting right alongside Trump, or are they going to be the ones who are left in his wake, essentially paying for his extravagant, net worth to go up even further?
Well, Molly, one thing that you mentioned was when we were talking about Tether, it's just like some people will be in a really bad place if that, in the crypto world. But how much could the crypto world impact all of us, people who don't have any assets or don't even have many stocks, or just have are just going paycheck to paycheck, maybe trying to get a little money in our savings here and there? I mention that because I'm sure you know better than I. Crypto had these like insane crashes. Like in 2017, it was like 87% or something. Just like,
Yeah.
just complete. It is completely huge compared to anything in since 1929 or whatever, right?
Right.
I mean, like it
Yeah,
just
yeah. Like if that happened on the stock market, people would be like jumping out of buildings and stuff.
Right.
there's legislation and there are practices in place. I think that it could almost, prevent the stock market from doing that now. But Bitcoin,
Yeah. They can freeze it. Right?
yeah, Bitcoin, Ethereum, these things run around the clock. We've seen, like I said, historically huge crashes. So going down from 100,000 in Bitcoin to going down to 60 or whatever it was, I don't know what number whatever it is. What if there's a free fall down to single digits? What if there's that sort of thing? Because that's not totally uncharacteristic of crypto. And it seems like there are just so many Americans from that 2020 to 2023 era who are still nursing crypto in their portfolios. These are people who probably should have their money in much safer assets because they don't have a lot of money. I mean, could crypto be the thing? Let's say a stable coin. This not to be doomsday, but I think our audience is interested in hearing the answer to this question. Could that have reverberations that impact everybody?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is a really important question to be asking. Because you're right, in the past, there have been these huge crashes. 2022 is probably the most recent, unless you count what's happening right now. And most people didn't even notice it happened, right? If they didn't hold crypto. Or maybe they saw, a headline about FTX and Sam Bankman-Fried, but, it didn't affect their day-to-day lives. They didn't lose their job. If they held stocks, their stocks didn't really change. It was only the people who held crypto who suffered. And to be fair, those people suffered a lot during that time, especially if they had assets with one of the companies that collapsed. But it was not this huge, financial disaster, broadly speaking. And I think that's the real concern going forward is because, we're starting to see the crypto industry becoming tightly integrated with the rest of the financial system, whether it's crypto ETFs, whether it is 401ks and pension funds beginning to bring crypto into their portfolios. We're obviously seeing this explosion of companies adding crypto to their balance sheets. The list goes on, really. And the question is now, if crypto has one of these collapses, which again, it tends to do on a fairly regular basis, will everyday people feel the pain this time? I really liken it to 2008, which is that even if you didn't have a house or you didn't invest in, mortgage-backed securities or whatever, you still felt the pain of that collapse when, your stocks went down if you had them, there was unemployment, there was just sort of broad ramifications throughout the economy. And I think that, the longer this goes on, the more that the crypto industry gets its preferred legislation in place, the longer the regulators basically abandon their responsibility to oversee this sector, the worse the risk is for that type of a contagion event. Because we are seeing this huge overlap now with traditional finance and the crypto sector, such that if crypto did have such a collapse, we would probably see effects in traditional finance. And, the question then becomes, okay, how much of an effect and how much would it affect everyday people versus people on K Street? But I think it's a real concern.
Crypto's been big in 2024. This year, I think what is standing out is AI investing because like the cryptocurrency industry did, they seem to really be kissing Trump's feet and trying to, force themselves, embed themselves so deep in government and society that their failure would that the government will then act to protect it from failure.
Too big to fail, essentially.
Yeah. A lot of these folks are the same people that hyped other cycles of tech. Moment of silence real quick for the bored apes we lost along the way. Somewhere in the metaverse. Right? Remember the metaverse?
I try not to.
that was awesome. But I mean, people have lost real money about this stuff. Smaller groups of people have increased their wealth and power tremendously. A lot of these folks are really bullish on AI now. So I guess that brings me to Tech Influence Watch. Right? You've been publishing research and sort of tracking the influence of these sectors for a while, but I saw you recently updated it to include the AI industry. What led you to do that?
Well, so I have been following the crypto sector's influence on politics since 2024. So when they started to do this huge campaign spending, I, created a website that allowed people to go and look and see, which companies are spending, where is the money going, which candidates are benefiting from these huge spending campaigns or which ones are they spending to oppose. Because I didn't feel like it was something that a lot of people knew about. A lot of people know that big oil or big pharma or, those various interests spend heavily to influence politics. But most people don't think about crypto being one of those players. And then this cycle, I was updating the site to follow 2026 to see where crypto is spending in the midterms. And I realized that I was only sort of telling half the story because artificial intelligence companies have started to do exactly what the crypto industry did in 2024. The PACs are structured very similarly. They're, in some cases, are sharing operatives. There's, one PAC that is led by a spokesperson for the crypto PAC. There's an AI PAC that is led by a crypto PAC spokesperson. And the PACs are coordinating to some extent, where we're seeing crypto will come and spend in a race, AI will go and spend in that race. And so I felt like, I needed to add artificial intelligence because that would be the only way to really capture this influence. And, you look at the companies that are spending on these political campaigns. Andreessen Horowitz was one of the biggest crypto PAC spenders in 2024. This year, they're splitting their spending between crypto and AI. And so to say that, Andreessen Horowitz's spending is really only reflecting crypto would have been, an omission essentially. And so, yeah, now I'm tracking hundreds of millions of dollars coming out of both crypto and AI in a midterm season even. I mean, there's no presidential race to speak of that, these companies are funding. It's all to do with the midterms.
There's a really bad APAC joke in here somewhere.
Yes, I write out AI pack a lot and confuse people, and so I'm trying to think of a better term. And they do actually, weirdly enough, the crypto packs do spend heavily alongside APAC as well. That was something I noticed in 2024.
You're shocking me with this Venn diagram here. You're kidding me.
Yeah, there is unfortunately considerable overlap there.
So according to the figures you've got on Tech Influence Watch, AI and crypto together have pumped more than $400 million into this election cycle.
Yep.
These PACs have like $300 million on hand, which I think I saw you note somewhere is more than like the party committees have on hand for the midterms.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at like the top super PACs by how much money they have on hand, Fair Shake, which is the biggest crypto PAC, is number 2. It was number 1 for a really long time. It was recently passed by the Senate Republicans Committee. But if you add together all the crypto PACs and the AI PACs, it's well beyond what any of the party committees have. And in 2024, we were seeing some of these committees outraise Trump's PACs and Harris's PACs. I mean, it was incredible how much money they were raising.
It's almost like very rich people are trying to ram this down on everyone's throat. It's like, I don't know. It's crazy. That's crazy. Am I crazy about that or what?
No, I think you're completely right. I mean, if you look at how these PACs act, you can tell that they know that their businesses are not necessarily popular. So they claim, you'll see all these press releases and they actually run polls to try to support this claim that Americans love crypto, that, tons of Americans are holding it and they're just dying for this regulation or legislation that the industry is pushing. And all of these voters are going to come out in force to vote for you if you're a candidate who says that you're going to get on board with this crypto agenda. And then you actually look at, the ads, for example, that these PACs run, they don't mention crypto. A lot of them don't mention technology or the economy. They just run on whatever they think, they'll do an opposition ad against someone that attacking them on something, or, they'll try. There have even been crypto funded ads that have been attacking candidates for being corporate funded, which I think is really funny because
what in the world?
There's like $10 million will go towards this ad that'll say that, oh, this candidate is corporate funded. And it's like, you are the corporations. What are you doing? But yeah, I mean, they don't talk about the issues. They all have names like Fair Shake or Leading the Future or Defend American Jobs that are, they don't say anything about crypto. It's just like a totally benign name so that when at the end of the ad, when it says this ad was funded by Fair Shake, people have no idea what that means. And it's blatant that, they understand that if they come out and say, support this candidate because he's going to pass pro-crypto legislation, people are going to be like, I don't want that. And so, it's just this total lie, essentially.
It's massively unpopular. I feel like the polling I've seen, it's like a very firm majority of the country is like, yeah, politicians shouldn't be involved in this at all.
Yeah. I mean, there was a poll from a crypto media outlet even that said that the majority of people don't think that politicians should have any, especially in high office, should not have any personal involvement in the crypto sector. Like, that's a popular thing. It's the same thing with, people don't want people in office, representing them in office, trading stocks all the time or betting on prediction markets or trading on crypto. They just want them to represent their interests. But then you look at what people are doing in office and it's the opposite of that. It's why I think these PACs try to fly under the radars, because they know that people will hate it if they see that this is what's funding a candidate.
Do you have any sense of like what kind of candidates are receiving support from crypto and AI PACs? Like, are these overlapping circles? Is there a Venn diagram? Is there anything that like kind of stands out to them because it's extremely rare, I feel, that you see candidates go hit the campaign trail and, some of them might talk about AI, but like none of them talk about crypto, right?
Right.
I'm
Well, you
just
do see a little bit, which is that so super PACs, which is what the crypto industry is spending through, are not supposed to coordinate directly with campaigns. Now, obviously, that's kind
that
of one of
happens
those
all
like
the time.
wink
Yeah.
wink things, but one way that candidates will sort of signal that they are open to receiving this money is you'll see on a candidate's website, they'll say something like, I support innovation in America, or clear rules of the road when it comes to technology. Some of them will add bits to their website that do actually specifically mention AI, blockchain, those types of things. And in those cases, you'll often see the crypto industry coming out and spending in support of them. And so there is this sort of quiet acknowledgement of crypto and AI that happens. And it's usually not a big part of the candidate's public facing platform, but it is enough to essentially signal to these PACs that they are open to receiving this type of support. But yeah, I mean, we do see in a lot of cases, crypto and AI are spending together. Something like 15 races, we've seen both sectors come in and support the same candidates. Or in one case, there was a race where crypto supported one candidate and then AI opposed the other, the opponent. So they were spending in the same direction, but not
I
necessarily on the same candidate. And we've seen it's been somewhat bipartisan. So there's been spending to support Republicans and spending to support often Democratic challengers to incumbents that the industry feels is a threat to their goals. So, for example, there was a challenger to Al Green in Texas who received almost $5 million, or actually, no, $6.5 million from the cryptocurrency industry to primary Al Green, who has been an outspoken critic of the crypto industry and has been very focused on consumer protection and those types of things. And he's certainly an outspoken critic of Trump and Trump's crypto corruption. And so the industry spent very heavily to try to succeeded in winning against him in the primary.
So when we say the industry, are we meaning like the exchanges, or because the whole thing about crypto is that it's like decentralized, right?
That's what they
So,
say.
I mean that's what they say. I believed it for a minute, but yeah, when we talk about the crypto industry, I mean, where is $400 million coming from?
Yeah, so there's three huge players in the crypto sector, which is Coinbase, which is a crypto exchange, Ripple, which creates the XRP cryptocurrency, and Andreessen Horowitz, which is now I consider them to be both crypto and AI because they are so heavily invested in both sectors. Those are the biggest funders in the crypto sector, and they are essentially leading the charge when it comes to crypto legislation. Coinbase in particular has an enormous amount of influence over the legislation that's being drafted right now. We actually saw when what's called the Clarity Act, which is a proposed crypto market structure bill, it was about to go to markup in the Senate, and Coinbase essentially pulled the plug on the markup session. That's crazy, right? To see a company, they put out a tweet essentially saying that they oppose this legislation, and like a couple hours later, the markup hearing was canceled.
That doesn't seem like something they should be able to do.
No, it doesn't at all. And, they've been having Brian Armstrong, their CEO, is constantly in Washington meeting with legislators. I mean, they're essentially writing this legislation. And so, yeah, when I say the industry, I'm referring to the industry PACs, which are spearheaded by Coinbase, Ripple, and Andreessen Horowitz. There are many other crypto exchanges that are very heavily involved in politics, whether it's by donating to Donald Trump, for example. Crypto.com was one of the biggest funders of Trump out of the tech sector. And they're a crypto exchange as well for people who are not familiar. And then there are actually this cycle, these new sort of splinter committees that have been created, I think mostly from companies that don't particularly support Fairshake's attempt at being bipartisan. So during 2024, there were a number of crypto exchanges. The Winklevoss twins, who run Gemini, were one major example of this. Also, Kraken, which is another crypto exchange, didn't really like that some of their money was going to support Democrats. They just wanted all MAGA all the time. And so this cycle, they've created new super PACs that are not only pro-crypto, but also exclusively pro-Republican and typically pro-MAGA Republican.
Is there any indication so far that this money is having a real effect? I mean, you mentioned Coinbase essentially being like, we don't support this, and then the plug getting yanked out on this markup hearing. But from what you can tell, is this really having a huge impact? I mean, I guess you could look at the Trump administration, what it's been doing, like with the AI industry, for example, whether it's clawing back regulations or pledging investments or supporting investments in infrastructure, that sort of thing. I mean, is this, in your opinion, has this been money well spent for them?
Unfortunately, it has. And I would say it has in a handful of different ways. So one way that we've seen it is when it comes to political campaigns specifically. So for example, in 2024, the crypto industry spent $40 million to oppose Sherrod Brown, who is one of the biggest crypto critics basically on the Hill. He was also the head of the Senate Banking Committee, which is, as you would imagine, enormously influential when it comes to crypto legislation. So they got him out. They replaced him with Bernie Moreno, who is incredibly pro-crypto and who also sits on the Senate Banking Committee. He voted for the crypto legislation that was signed into law earlier this year, and he's been a major driver of the Clarity Act market structure legislation that the crypto industry has really been pushing for. So I mean, that was a huge success, for example. We've seen other campaign successes this year. I mentioned the Al Green race, where they were able to successfully primary him. You know, there have been a handful of other elections that have gone in their favor. And then there's also the legislative and regulatory end of things. The regulators have done a complete 180 when it comes to crypto, where practically every single enforcement action against crypto companies from the Securities and Exchange Commission, there were like 20 either investigations or active enforcement actions that were canceled or dropped. The SEC has even gone so far as to work with some of these cryptocurrency companies to reverse the decisions that were made under the previous administration and like return fines on settled cases that had already been decided. There's been a complete shutdown in enforcement across the board. And the SEC and CFTC have essentially done what the crypto industry wants from legislation, even though the legislation hasn't been passed. So the crypto industry has for years wanted the CFTC to be the primary regulator of the crypto sector rather than the SEC. Because they're a smaller agency, they have fewer resources, they have much less of a consumer protection mandate. Generally speaking, you know, the crypto industry thinks it's going to be more favorable to them to have the CFTC as the lead regulator. And that's essentially the status quo right now, even though legislation has not been passed that would change any of the underlying laws that determine who is in charge of regulating the sector. And then we've seen all of these ways in which various companies have spent either on congressional elections or more frequently on Trump's campaign, or they've done business deals with Trump that have personally profited Trump. And then we've seen directly following that multiple examples where things have suddenly gone their way. So, you know, whether it's SEC cases being dropped or the CFTC, for example, has been really going to bat in court for prediction markets, which a lot of these companies are now involved in. And that's obviously hugely favorable to them to have the federal commodities regulator going to bat for them in court. We've seen pardons when it comes to, for example, Binance and Changpeng Zhao, the CEO, who was convicted in 2024, I think. You know, there's been multiple employees of some of these companies that have been installed in the White House to directly push the agenda. Multiple Andreessen Horowitz employees, for example, are in the White House. The list honestly goes on and on and on, where you can see how these companies are really reaping the benefits of both their campaign spending and also the business deals that they've been doing with Trump.
I mean, hearing all that, it almost sounds like they're getting a bargain.
Yeah, no, I think so. I mean, if you're at one of these companies and you're not spending this kind of money, it's almost like shareholders should be asking what you're doing, right? Because like it's clear that the best return on investment is to do this kind of spending, which is horrifying, right? For the rest of us who would like to see a fairly functional government and a world in which crypto scammers are not just running around completely without any sort of oversight.
I think in a just world, if you call your PAC Defend American Workers and you promote Web3, you should see some jail time for that, which I don't know if it's actually a crime yet. I haven't looked into it, but, someone please make one. The question I have is, there are definitely some crimes here that are happening.
You could just feel it. You could just feel it.
No, we feel it. I know there's crimes. Like I could just, I feel like any serious-minded Department of Justice could look at this administration and what happened with these products and find crimes. So the question becomes like, what could, in theory, a new Congress do, possibly around impeachment or other punishment, and following that with theoretically a complete change in power in the White House. If we get that far as a country, hopefully. What could they do? What could they do? Because certainly America is being ripped off right now.
Yeah, can the toothpaste go back in the tube?
I'd like to think so. I think you're right that, there is so much shady behavior here that it would be, honestly, I think more challenging for a future Department of Justice not to run into a crime. Like if they, to turn their head away from the crimes that are happening here. Obviously, presidents enriching themselves off of the office is supposed to be illegal, right? That was previously something that presidents didn't do, or certainly didn't do this overtly, right? You can always make arguments about book deals and all that kind of thing.
There's a real question of scale here.
Right. There's a huge question of scale here.
A president taking $1 million for a book deal, or a president basically hoovering up $2.3 billion from his followers in cryptocurrency is not the same.
Right. And in a perfect world, we would change it so that neither of those things happens. But, I think that in this case, we're just seeing these egregious circumstances where, I don't think you would have to scratch very hard to find the crime under there. And I haven't even gone into the question of foreign nationals who have been enriching Trump, or the business deals where we're seeing, for example, the UAE putting huge amounts of money into Trump companies and Trump family funds and things like that, and then suddenly getting access to advanced AI chips or a stake in TikTok. I mean, it's unbelievable to see the kind of sort of pay for play that seems to be happening when it comes to decisions that are being made at the White House as well. And I think that, it would be a complete dereliction of duty, essentially, for the next Congress to just move on from this, to try to say, this happened, we're just going to move forward, because this is the kind of thing that cannot be allowed to continue. These types of deals have just such a corrosive impact on not only democracy, but just the general trust in democracy, or the belief by American people that their government is meant to serve them and not billionaires. And so I think that, in a hopefully future circumstance when, there's a change in power in Congress or a new president, one of the first things that they're going to need to do is investigate all of these deals. And it's going to take them a while because the list is very long. And then look into potentially impeachment if Trump is still in office. And certainly into potential criminal repercussions for not only Trump, but for many people around Trump, whether it's his family members who are running a lot of these businesses, or even others in the White House who have roles in these businesses. I mean, Steve Witkoff, for example, is the ambassador to the Middle East. He's negotiating a lot of these deals with the UAE, with Saudi Arabia, and is simultaneously profiting from World Liberty Financial, which is one of the Trump family crypto companies where his son is an executive. And so you see, multiple cases of conflict like that should have been handled. They should have been forced to divest immediately upon entering the government, and not just by handing businesses over to their children, which is what a lot of these people are doing, whether it's Trump or Steve Witkoff or Howard Lutnick, but, properly divest. And so, going back and taking a look at that and understanding what happened and how we can stop it from happening again, I think it needs to be one of the top priorities for the next administration.
The reminder for everybody why we keep bringing up the issue of free and fair elections, why we're so concerned about it. Not only have we seen this pattern from Trump and his people, the way they disregard election results, et cetera, but they have every incentive to not leave power again because of
Right.
these very issues.
Yeah, and I mean, frankly, I think that we're going to see more and more egregious behavior the closer we come to elections that threaten the balance of power. I mean, we're already starting to see that with the midterms and, people questioning election results and things like that. But especially when it comes to, 2028, I think we need to be very cautious now about how to prevent that going forward.
Yeah, because the way they're running the country right now, it feels like to me is the way that somebody who doesn't plan on leaving would run it, right? Because otherwise, it's like, your opposition party takes over and you get what we're starting to see in places like, in Hungary, where it's like the first order of business in this new administration is just like, let's catch up on some emails and see what happened.
Yeah.
Because it looked bad and it is undoubtedly worse, right? But these industries have invested really heavily in, the Republican side of the aisle, as you were saying. There were some schisms and like disagreements with some of parts of the industry over groups that were trying to approach it in a bipartisan sense. But you mentioned that, AI and crypto are also spending on Democrats and stuff. Does that give you any concern that, should the balance of power flip to you? Is that does that give you any hesitation or doubt over whether there will be political will to chase this down?
It does to some extent. I do think that, some of the corruption that we're seeing is going to be hard to justify not going after, even if you are sort of bought and paid for. And, we have seen some of the Democrats who are heavily supported by the crypto industry have their limits, right? There have been points where even some of the top beneficiaries of crypto spending in 2024 have said, like, I really can't get on board with this unless we add some sort of Trump ethics agreement or, some sort of language that will just not sign off on what Trump has been doing. Because, even with that kind of backing from the industry, they know that they still have to answer to their constituents. And, there's still some degree of accountability there. So yes, to some extent, the thing that really worries me is just the influence of money in politics, broadly speaking, across the board.
Yeah.
Because regardless of whether it's crypto or AI, there's still so much money going into politics right now and causing candidates and elected officials to prioritize the agenda of these industries above the people that they are supposed to be representing. And prosecuting Trump or various other people who have profited off of the presidency won't necessarily change that, right? Certainly, we need to be adding more robust oversight, putting more power back with the Federal Election Commission, which has essentially zero today, to oversee the type of campaign spending that does happen. But I think that until we get this big money out of politics, broadly speaking, we're just going to be kicking the can down the road. And it's just going to be different industries every time, but, the same sort of issues where everyday people who, don't want an AI data center built next door to their house, driving up their electricity prices and causing terrible noise pollution and all this kind of stuff, they can't trust that their representatives are going to prioritize their safety and their health when, a billionaire who probably lives 10 states away is funding their election campaign. And so, I don't know how we get around that without changing the rules around campaign finance.
Are there any signs of optimism you can point us to so that we end this one on a bright note? Is
There
there any
actually
is,
are.
is there anything like what you're doing with Tech Influence Watch and your research that you've put out on the crypto industry's efforts similarly? I think I've been subscribed to your newsletter like since it debuted, right? And I always find it super interesting because it's a world that I don't watch all the time. I'm sure like half of the things I brought up today I read at some point in your newsletter, but it's it can feel very bleak because it almost feels like the bad guys are winning, right? To put it in really simplistic terms. But people don't like this. I mean, I feel like when you look at polling, the attitudes, among Americans, it seems like Americans smell bullshit on the AI stuff. They smell bullshit on the crypto stuff, and they don't think the government should be getting mixed up with it. But is there anything that gives you optimism that like it doesn't have to be this way forever?
Yeah, there are a handful of things. One is the number of candidates that we're seeing that are explicitly calling out corporate spending and are, often refusing corporate PAC money, just outright saying, I'm not going to take money from crypto, from AI, from whatever business it is that's trying to influence me. I think that's incredible. That it's a huge uptick in candidates who are running on those kinds of platforms compared to, 4 or 8 years ago. So I think that is really promising. We're seeing candidates that are expressly calling out this kind of spending. And one of the most hopeful things that I've seen is that there have been a number of cases where when candidates who were being targeted by the crypto industry raised awareness among their voters of this spending, it actually worked in their favor. So I think Illinois is one of the best examples of this, where Juliana Stratton, who was running for Senate, was seeing $10 million of opposition spending from the cryptocurrency industry just in the primary. And she ended up winning her election pretty handily after making that an actual point of her campaign to say that crypto is coming after me. This is what the industry does when they come, when they see a candidate who is going to challenge them. That ended up really working in her favor. And it actually happened elsewhere in Illinois as well, in District 7, where the crypto industry spent $2.5 million against LaShawn Ford. They ran brutal attack ads that essentially implied that he was a criminal.
I remember this. I live in Chicago, so I keep up with
Oh,
Illinois
yeah.
politics. It got nasty.
Yeah, it was really nasty. And yet, both of those candidates won their primaries, even in the face of that kind of spending. And I mean, you look at how much of, $2.5 million, it's like a little bit hard to really, think about in your head. It's just such a huge number. But LaShawn Ford raised $650,000, right? And so the amount of spending against him was magnitudes larger. And yet he still won that election. And so I think that is a really promising sign that, like, sure, they can spend all this money, but ultimately voters are going to make a decision of their own. And candidates are able to, bring awareness to things like this and call out the fact that, like, hey, those attack ads that you're seeing, those are coming from the crypto industry. It's called fair shake, but it's crypto. And really sort of make a point of it in their campaigns, and it can backfire. And so I'm hoping that we'll see more of that throughout the rest of the primaries and then going into the general election, where candidates are able to actually sort of grab hold of this and incorporate it into their messaging. And I'm hoping that we'll see that in the opposite direction as well, where, when a candidate is being funded to the tune of millions of dollars for their campaigns from crypto, from AI, whatever corporate interest it may be, their opponents will say, look, this is a candidate who is representing the interests of Coinbase, not of you, the person who lives in their district. And I'm hoping that we'll see more of that going forward.
Okay, so this is nominally a podcast that covers internet right-wing things, but really people who've listened to us for a long time understand that we're just at our core a music podcast. So while you must be listening, you have to be, while you're looking at all these charts and all these other things crypto related, have to be. What type of music are you listening to these days?
It depends a lot on what I'm doing. I am one of those people who cannot process information if I'm also hearing words in my ears. And so if I'm doing like a lot of data analysis, I have to listen to something that's either not in English or has no words at all. So I've been listening to a lot of like synthwave playlists recently, which is kind of a good way to just like get in the groove when I'm doing it. But if I can tolerate words, I generally listen to a lot of metal and like deathcore and stuff like that.
Hit us with some cuts. We have a lot of people in our audience that fuck with that music.
I'm a huge fan of Lorna Shore. They've been one of my favorites recently. And then broadly metal, I love Mastodon, Gojira, those types of bands a lot. Yeah. I actually saw the three of them perform together, which was incredible.
Oh, sweet. Well, we've been talking to Molly White. We'll put a link to her social media profiles, the Tech Influence Watch website. There's a newsletter there. Highly recommend signing up for it. Molly, thanks so much for joining us and talking to us about digital money in politics, I guess.
Thanks for having me.
And come back on Thursday, where we will be talking about Graham Platter.
Uh-oh.